Well, cheers. Welcome to Hopefully Here Reading. I am Hope, and I am really excited to be doing this video because when I tell you I had an incredible reading month in July, I am not exaggerating. I think some of my best books of the year are from this month, and there's more than one of them. It was such a good reading month, and I decided I need to talk about it. First, though, let us begin the day with a coffee. And now, let's talk about some books. Got my Storygraph open. I'm just going to go in the order in which I read them and talk about them as we go. First up, I read Jeremy Clarkson's Diddly Squat Till the Cows Come Home. I just think he's funny. I really enjoy Clarkson's Farm as a show. And ultimately, these are, I think they're just columns from a newspaper he writes for, but they're basically just his episodes on Amazon Prime in written form. A lot of the stuff is repeats, but I don't know, it was a good time, super easy. It was a one-sitting read, and I enjoyed myself immensely. Next, let's talk about the fact that I have finished the Faithful and the Fallen series. I got to reading book 4, which is Wrath in this series. I absolutely love this. I'm so looking forward to reading whatever I choose next from John Gwynne. I don't know if I'm going to read his other, like, totally different series, or if I'm going to read the next, I believe it's a trilogy in the same world. I haven't heard the greatest things about the second trilogy in this world, but because of how much I really enjoyed this, I'm still going to at least give it a go. I think the way it wrapped up was done really well. It is a classic fantasy storyline. You got your good guys, your bad guys, the light, the dark, gods, giants. It's such a classic formula, but I think his world building and his characters were very strong, and I had a great time reading this. If you have thought about picking this up but are a little intimidated by the size, I would say give it a go anyways. I think it's a fairly easy reading experience. I don't think he is overly descriptive. He's not flowery. It's just an easy world to follow. You do get a ton of POVs. Some of them are not heads you want to be in. They are reprehensible people. But I overall had such an incredible time with this. I'm very much looking forward to continuing on with his writing. And then I'm jumping on the hype train. I saw this book and thought, you know what? That actually sounds incredible. And so I picked it up. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I adored this book. It's big, but I read it in like 2 days. I had an incredible time reading this. I think the toxicity between the women in this book is done so very well, and I loved the world building and I loved the writing. I think because it was V.E. Schwab, I was a little hesitant because she's been hit or miss with me, but I loved Addie LaRue a lot, and this was compared more to the Addie LaRue type storytelling than her, what's the magician? The other books that she writes, and decided to pick this up, and I am thrilled that I did. I haven't heard a single bad thing about this book. I'm sure that they're out there. I'm sure that not everybody loved this, but the hype on this is so very accurate. In this, you're following 3 women, and they become vampires at different parts in the timeline, and different parts, like one becomes a vampire in like the 15th or 14th century, one in like the 1800s, and then one is a more present day. And how their lives connect is very, very interesting. I think side characters are really interesting as well. And I love the concept of vampirism in this book, the way V.E. Schwab writes. She comes up with a couple of unique things that happens with vampires, particularly as they age. And I loved just that tiny little bit of uniqueness and creativity that I haven't read from or read about in any other vampire story. Absolutely adored this book and would highly, highly, highly recommend. If this isn't on like a top of the year for me, I will be absolutely baffled, but then thrilled, because that means my reading has been incredible. I also read Crash Test by Amy James, and this is an F1 romance between Travis and Jacob. And one of them gets into a really bad accident, but nobody knows that they're together. So the one who is not in a coma is trying to navigate the waters of how to appear concerned without appearing too concerned, because they're not technically supposed to know each other, but they've actually been together for a while. It was an interesting dynamic. I think for me personally, I wanted more F1, and this was very much off-track F1, like they are drivers, but it wasn't really like the most crucial component. It was very much more about them growing as people, apart and together, and their relationship that's a secret, and all the stuff that comes along with that. And so I enjoyed this. It wasn't my favorite, but I did read it very quickly and had an okay time with it. Shall we now then go on to the ones that didn't work out too well for me? Because as good as my reading month was, I did have a couple of surprise DNFs. One being Julie Shan is Dead by Lilian Zhang. And in this you are following, what's her name? Julie, who has a twin sister. They were kind of separate, not kind of, they were separated at birth and raised in very different environments. Julie was raised by an aunt, and the other girl, Chloe, was adopted by what appears to be a very affluent white family, I think. And when Chloe dies, there are circumstances surrounding it, and Julie steps into her life because Chloe has a career as an influencer, has a gazillion followers, makes really good money, and Julie thinks that her life is just so much better, and so she takes it over. I got to kind of that point. I had gotten to the point where Julie was living her life as Chloe and was so very bored by this. I don't think I love thrillers where really nothing, like, you know something is going to happen, but nothing is actually happening. And to me, it was just too slow paced, and I really didn't like the main character at all. So I did end up DNFing this one. I also DNF'd Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. Again, I was so bored. I both tried this physically and as an audiobook, and I was not having a good time. It was almost too detailed. It almost went into too much of the back. I don't know what it was about this book, to be honest, but there was something in the storytelling that to me was very dry and wasn't compelling me to want to keep reading. And I would put this down and I wouldn't pick it up for a couple of days. And then ultimately I was looking at it and I thought, I actually don't want to read this anymore. So it got put in the DNF pile. One book that surprised the heck out of me and is, again, one of the best books I have read this year, and that is All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. Such a chunky book. This was a month of chunky books because I've got 3 more that are also quite large. And I flew through this. You are following Patch and, oh, what is the other girl's name? Patch and Saint. You're following Patch and Saint. And at the beginning of the story, Patch does something kind of heroic because these women are going missing. And he gets involved in it in a weird way. Wait, is it Patch that's the... Oh, now I'm getting... Yeah, Patch. Sorry, now that I was getting the characters confused again. And there is a lot of, like, the relationship between Patch and Saint is really the focal point of this book, but also there's so much more going on. And I would say this is a mystery that is very compelling. I don't know that I would call it a thriller necessarily, particularly because of the size of it. I would have a hard time calling any book the size of thriller just because of how propulsive a thriller is supposed to be, and at this size, that's kind of hard to achieve. But I think the way the relationship between Patch and Saint is written in this, and then the huge ramifications of this killer coming into town and bodies disappearing and cops being or not being forthcoming with what's going on and all the side characters. I absolutely love this. I think the relationship is the strongest part of this book, and I had such an incredible time, and I was blown away by how good this was. I believe I've heard good things about it, but I think it's been out for a little while. When did this get published? Oh, okay, 2024, so it hasn't been out for that long. But I don't remember hearing much about this book. I don't think I had heard anything negative. So again, when I picked this up, absolutely blown away just by how good the storytelling was in this. Another book I had heard people raving about was Days of Light by Megan Hunter. I thought this book was okay. It is very much, if you liked The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden, I can see why you would really enjoy this book as well. And I loved The Safekeep, but for me, Days of Light, it didn't have that same charm, that same thing where you were really kind of curious about the characters and not quite sure where they were going to go. There was just something about the way this one was written. I think because there's such a time jump between so many of the years that I didn't love, and I didn't totally understand the main protagonist's point of view. So while I did enjoy this, I am not somebody who is madly in love with it, and that's how I'd heard about it. I'd heard a couple people talking about it, and they just thought it was so incredible. And so maybe it's my expectations were too high for this book. But in this, you're following one day or a couple of days, and it jumps kind of every 10 years or so. And so you're following this one person's life, but you're missing large chunks of the life. And I don't know, for me, it just seemed a little choppy. It felt like it was missing something, and it's probably because of how the story was broken up. But it just wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. If you're going to choose one or the other, The Safekeep or Days of Light, I would definitely go with The Safekeep. Okay, The Artist and the Feast by Lucy Steeds. I have wanted to read this book ever since, I believe it's either, I heard about it on Women's Prize season. I think it was just longlisted for Women's Prize. And I believe when it was nominated for Women's Prize, it's just called The Artist over in the UK. In America, it's called The Artist and the Feast, and it just came out. I really enjoyed this. It was one of those books when I first heard the premise, I thought, that's a book I could enjoy. I like books about art. And in this, you're following a man who gets invited to this estate to essentially observe or interview a very well-known artist, but he isn't known for being welcoming to the public. And he gets there and he realizes he hasn't actually been invited by the artist. He's been invited by the artist's niece, who takes care of the estate. Like, things could not function without her. And as he stays, he realizes things aren't exactly what they seem. Not in a supernatural way or anything, but just in the way this man's art is presented to the world. There are things going on behind the scenes that even the artist isn't aware of. And I thought it was really, really interesting. I thought it was an interesting time period. I thought the way the artist was portrayed versus the niece was really good, and the man who kind of gets thrown into this situation, fabulous. Really enjoyed, just based on my limited knowledge of the Women's Prize, because I didn't read much of it this year. I'm kind of surprised it wasn't shortlisted because of how much I enjoyed it, but we also know I didn't read the Women's Prize because they didn't nominate the best book written by a woman last year. Wasn't even on their long list, and so I kind of boycotted it this year a little bit, but that is a whole different thing. Really enjoyed this. If you're thinking about picking it up, obviously, I encourage. And now we need to talk about the month that was Friedrich Bachmann, because my oh my, this man can write. I read My Friends, which is his most recent release, and in this you are following, what is her name? Louisa. And Louisa gets herself, there's this painting that Louisa is very attracted to, and there's a reasoning behind that, which you discover. And in this painting, there are 3 boys, and she really wants to know the story of these 3 boys, and she gets the story in a really unexpected way. And so it's the story of Louisa discovering life from the perspective of these boys and where they are now and why the painting was done. And Friedrich Bachmann has a way of breaking your heart, like just shattering it and sometimes not putting it back together. But I think this one, particularly for Bachmann, was really healing. And I think there was so much joy and love between all the different relationships that you get in this book. This, for me, was one of his happiest books. And I say that very cautiously because it's definitely not happy, funny book. But for me, Bachmann's, the way he writes relationships, I think is impeccable, and that is very well showcased in this book. And I think the story between Louisa and then kind of the flashbacks between the boys in this painting and the painting, I absolutely loved, and he's just so good. However, nothing is as good as the Bearman trilogy. And I realize I'm only holding up 2, but I don't have Beartown because I read it in June. I did read the other 2 books of the Beartown trilogy in July. 6, 7-star trilogy. Heartbreaking, heartwarming, everything you want between people and their environment, and learning and character building and character development. Everything you want is in this. And you know from book 1 that an incredibly devastating thing is going to happen. It is foreshadowed and bashed over your head, and yet the entire time you're reading, you think, no, there's no way that's going to happen. I'm not reading this correctly. And then you get to that moment, and it's so incredibly emotional and so very well written that you know that even though this incredibly devastating thing is happening, there's going to be something on the other side that calms that devastation. And the way it is done is absolutely brilliant. The way every book introduces some sort of character and you never know exactly where they're going to fit into the puzzle, and then they do, and it's seamless, and you think, well, how have we not always had their point of view? How has that storyline not been incorporated in all the other storylines previous? Absolutely brilliant. You're following a town, Beartown, and a hockey team, and Beartown doesn't have a whole lot going for it except for this hockey team that is on the verge of being champion, like junior champions or something like that. And then an event happens and it all comes crashing down, and it's really about this town hiding behind the truth and the not truth and wanting to protect themselves, and then other people trying to push and be a little bit more open and transparent, and how in a small town the politics come into play. I absolutely adore this trilogy. I read it from the library, but it is a trilogy I will be purchasing because I absolutely have to own this. I will reread it at some point, and I'm told everybody in my family because we grew up in a very small town and we're very, the hockey scene was very prevalent in our lives. They had to read this. Just so flippin' fantastic. That was my July. What can I say? Like, the reading in July, just, I mean, I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled with how well it went. Tell me, how good was your July reading? I hope it was comparable to mine. I hope you at least found one incredible book. Let me know what it was if you did, and I will see you in the next video, because next up on the docket, look what I've started. I got an arc. We're giving the Booker Prize one more shot. I think that's probably what you'll see next. We'll see. Bye.